Well, hey there, welcome back to Wasting Time in the Woods and another episode of This Old Truck. I recently purchased a 97 4runner for my wife with 210,000 miles on it. Because nothing says I love you like buying your wife a broken down old 4x4 that you've always wanted and promising to fix it as soon as you learn how. In this episode, we'll do a coolant flush, we'll spill a good bit on our shoes, twice, and we'll cover in detail the first thing that you should do to any high mileage 3rd gen 4runner, a radiator exchange. Better grab a couple beers, borrow some tools from your father-in-law, because it's time to fix up an old 4runner. Making a high mileage 3rd gen 4runner last forever is a labor of love. Like any marriage, it takes maintenance to make it last. A radiator needs to be flushed every 30,000 miles. If you don't flush it, contaminants and dirt build up, leading to reduced cooling capacity, and worse, corrosion. Corrosion can lead to radiator failure, and in the case of the 3rd gen 4runner, transmission cooler failure as well. In the 3rd gen 4runner, the engineers at Toyota placed the transmission cooler inside of the radiator. Now, that's a pretty common practice. It helps the transmission to get up to temperature in cold climates. The problem is that if your transmission cooler develops a leak, you'll never know until you've ruined your transmission and damaged your engine and possibly your marriage.
Yep, that is not the consistency we want.
Your coolant will mix with the transmission fluid and you'll get what's commonly referred to as SMOD, or strawberry milkshake of death. It's a fun little phrase, isn't it? According to the interwebs, SMOD occurs at a fairly high frequency among 3rd gen 4runners bought by cheap bastards for their very patient wives. So we're gonna do the right thing and do a full coolant flush and then change the radiator for a brand new one as a precaution. Now, the previous owner had a flush done about 20,000 miles ago, so it doesn't really need it. Flushing the radiator is cheap and easy though, and we don't want to introduce any contaminants into the new one, so we're gonna go ahead and do it anyway. Flushing the radiator involves draining the old fluid and replacing it with distilled water several times. Between each flush, you'll need to run the vehicle for about 10 minutes to circulate the water and the remaining coolant. Because a lot of the coolant stays in the engine block after draining the radiator, we'll need to repeat this process several times to dilute the old fluid and flush out all the contaminants. To tackle this task, you'll need a few supplies. I used a bottle of cooling system cleaner on the first flush. Not totally necessary, but it was cheap. You'll need some way to catch the fluid. 2 of these disposable turkey pans are just about the perfect volume for each flush. You'll need some coolant. I ended up exchanging this Peak for Toyota Premix Red because I'm a brand whore. And you'll need enough distilled water to rehydrate 2 Camels. I started with 8 gallons and I had 1 gallon left after 5 flushes. To get started, make sure that your truck has cooled completely so that you can remove the radiator cap without it exploding in your face. Keep in mind that this process can take a while because you need to let the engine block and radiator completely cool between each flush. You can also do this over a number of days so that it can cool overnight if that's more convenient for you. Start by popping the hood and locating the drain valve at the bottom of the radiator. Place one of your collection trays underneath it. Line up the drain valve with the center of the pan so that you can catch as much of the splashing as possible, and open the valve. I had to use a pair of needle nose pliers to break loose the valve for the first time, but once you got it open, it should start to trickle out. Now, this stuff is more toxic than a blind date with R. Kelly's, so make sure that you keep it away from your kids and your pets and clean up any spills right away. Even with the radiator cap open, it takes a surprisingly long time to drain. It's kind of like listening to a really old man pee in the middle of the night. Don't forget to switch trays halfway through. You don't want them too full for reasons that will become readily apparent momentarily. Now, we can't just get rid of this stuff anywhere. You're gonna need to take it to an auto parts store and leave it on the curb and then run. I mean, recycle it. They'll take it off your hands. That means we've got to get it back in our water bottles. That sounds simple enough, right? Step 1, place funnel in bottle. Step 2, carefully lift the tray. Try not to wiggle too much so that it doesn't fold in half like a lime green aluminum taco. Tilt one corner into the funnel and then spill it all over your shoes. Wait a minute, I'll get this. Nope, that didn't work either. All right, maybe a smaller funnel will help. Yeah, a smaller funnel. That sounds logical. All right, let's try stacking a big funnel into a little funnel. A perfect seal. That's on my shoes again. All right, let's move on. You'll figure that part out. Next, you'll need to refill the radiator with distilled water. You can do that by hand with an old school funnel or with one of these fancy Amazon funnels that allows you to plug the bottom of the funnel and remove it once the radiator is perfectly full. After that, you need to wait for the engine to completely cool. That takes a lot longer than I thought. It's a couple hours each time before the engine was cool enough to open up the radiator. Repeat this process 4 times until the coolant comes out clear. On the last pass, I left it empty so that I could remove the radiator and replace it with a new one. All right, to change out the radiator, you need to remove the grill. There's 7 of these little clips and you're gonna break 6 of them, so go ahead and use the link in the description to order a new set before you start. Next, remove the hoses. Make sure to use a bucket because there will still be some coolant left in there. These 2 little hoses at the bottom are the transmission cooler hoses, and you'll need to clamp them somehow so you don't spill transmission fluid all over the place. I bought these little hose scissor clamps on Amazon and they work great. Once all the hoses are out, you can remove the 4 bolts and pull the radiator out. Put the new radiator in and reverse the process of bolting it in and connecting the hoses. I also replaced the water hoses while I was in there. To refill the radiator, you can just pour liquid in it, but I bought one of these fancy filler funnels because it has a neat little trick. When you get the system full, you can plug the bottom of the funnel and transfer the overfill back into the original container. Replace the radiator cap, put the grill back in, and fire her up. Check for leaks. Make sure to add a little to the overflow tank as well. I took some time and cleaned out my overflow tank. You don't have to do that, but it will keep it a little cleaner in the future. Well, that was easy. Now we can feel safe about this guy not smodding itself to death for another couple 100,000 miles. One other way to avoid this and to avoid the possibility of it ever happening would be to add an external transmission cooler outside of the radiator, and that way you bypass the possibility of this ever happening and the fluids ever mixing. On the next episode of This Old Truck, we'll start tearing into the suspension. After 20 years, the old girl was due for a complete overhaul and rebuild, and that's what we gave her. Tune in next time to watch me get medieval on a tie rod. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.